embryogenesis and development of that zygote. And, you know, I guess embryogenesis and gastrulation, I didn't exactly want to go through like the whole process in this PowerPoint slide yet. But for the purposes of gastrulation, I really wanted to focus on like the different 3 main layers and then what they turn into, because that is also commonly tested as a discrete question on the MCAT. But yeah, so after the zygote forms, it undergoes processes of cleavage, turns into a morula, and then next into a blastocyst. And then it implants into the endometrium about a week after fertilization. So it continues to develop afterwards with the same hormone levels of estrogen and progesterone. And as I mentioned earlier, until 6 months of pregnancy. And at that 6 months is when the placenta itself can produce its amounts of estrogen and progesterone that it needs on its own. And then after implantation is when like gastrulation and the starting of the development of the embryo will occur. And so that's when the primary germ layers become distinct. And the primary germ layers are the ectoderm, the mesoderm, and the endoderm. And the main thing to know is, what parts of the human body are derived from each of the layers. And so in the ectoderm, that leads to the integumentary system, the epidermis, hair, nails, nose, mouth, and anal canal epithelia. Then also the central nervous system, which includes the adrenal medulla. That's also kind of like a fun fact that I think they've had like a flashcard question about that one, but I thought that was a little tricky before. And then eye lens and inner ear. And also regarding the ectoderm, there is the process of neurulation that that explains the development of the nervous system, but particularly because the reproductive system itself is already kind of a large topic today, I didn't exactly want to go over it in this lecture, but we are going to have a nervous system lecture next week. So I think that that's where, the beginning process of neurulation can be mentioned there. And so next, the mesoderm leads to the circulatory system, musculoskeletal system, and parts of the urinary and reproductive systems, which are includes the adrenal cortex and gonads, and then also the dermis, mesoderm and dermis. And then finally, there is the endoderm, which leads to the organs of the digestive system, the respiratory system, bladder, and reproductive tracts. And also here I wanted to mention, so as the cells are slowly going into each of these specific human body organs, they are slowly getting more and more specific and more determined. But they start off as totipotent, which means that they can turn into any cell of the body, and then they slowly go into pluripotent and multipotent, and then finally into their mature cells. So, commonly when we think of human stem cells, they are in the multipotent state. And then the rest of most of the other cells in our body are in the mature cell state. And pluripotent, totipotent, totipotent can turn into everything. Pluripotent is a little bit more specific in the sense that they would only be like within that particular like system or area or layer. And then multipotent, more specific, and mature cells, like exactly what the function is. And then I also included this diagram at the bottom to just visualize some of the different development during pregnancy. This is, I feel like, definitely not as high yield as some things. I know there's just like one straight question that I've seen before with like asking what is forming during some of these trimesters. So I'm including it here, but I feel like it's definitely not the most important thing to get out of this presentation. So I'm just going to go over it briefly. So during the first trimester, that's when gastrulation, neurulation, and all major organ systems appear. And then in the second trimester, that's when organs and organ systems of the fetus continue to develop structurally and functionally. And about this time is when the fetus is about 0.6 kilograms. And then finally, in the third trimester is when there's rapid fetal growth and significant deposition of adipose tissue. And most of the organ systems are fully functional at this stage. So when there are premature babies at this like third trimester stage, since their organ systems are mostly fully functional, they should have a good ability to survive. And so now we're going into birth and lactation. So as you guys may recognize here, I have a picture of Baby Yoda. I know Baby Yoda is not a human baby, but talking about the hormones. So the most important hormones associated with birth is oxytocin, it was briefly mentioned in that question earlier as an answer choice. But as I mentioned, it causes the uterine contractions to increase in intensity, causing greater pressure on the cervix that produces a positive feedback loop until after birth is when it stops. So as oxytocin increases, uterine contractions increase, which also leads to oxytocin increasing more and so on. And oxytocin is actually produced by the posterior pituitary instead of the anterior pituitary. And for the different stages of birth, so for this slide, oxytocin is definitely something that you guys should know, but the first stage, dilation of cervix, the second stage is then the baby moves through the cervix and birth canal, and third stage is when there's the expulsion of the placenta. These stages, not as high yield, just something to know with this information that we already have here. But then also another important hormone to know about is prolactin, which is for milk letdown. And so usually women maintain moderate to high levels of estrogen and progesterone throughout their life, which usually inhibits prolactin release. But because after they give birth, the levels of estrogen and progesterone levels decrease even more drastically than like what you would see in the luteal phase to menses phase, which actually is what causes milk letdown from prolactin, and for prolactin to not be inhibited by them.